Kokushibo, the former Upper Moon one of the 12 Kizuki, dies in his battle against the demon slayers. Stricken with regret for the choices he made and longing for redemption, Kokushibo's soul is offered a second chance by a divine entity. Reborn as Naruto Uzumaki in a world of shinobi, Kokushibo retains his memories, combat skills, and a new arsenal of godlike powers. Fueled by his desire to make amends and rise to supremacy, Naruto/Kokushibo shakes the foundation of the ninja world. Along the way, he gathers allies, builds a harem, and enforces his dominance. The air was thick with the scent of blood and burning flesh. Kokushibo knelt on the charred ground, his 6 eyes dimming as the life drained from his body. His blade lay broken beside him, fragments scattered like pieces of his shattered soul. Memories of centuries spent in servitude to Muzan Kibutsuji flooded his mind. Every life taken, every bond severed, and every fleeting moment of doubt that clawed at his resolve. He had walked the path of the demon, forsaking his humanity for strength and immortality. Yet, at this final hour, regret gnawed at his core. He thought of his younger brother, Yoruichi, the only man he had ever admired, the only one who had shown him the path of light. But Kokushibo had turned away, consumed by envy and fear. Now, with his body crumbling into ash, he wondered if redemption was ever possible. As the world around him faded to black, Kokushibo felt a presence of vast, incomprehensible force that dwarfed even Muzan's power. It was neither cruel nor kind but simply, there. You who have lived in darkness, the voice resonated, echoing within his fractured consciousness. You seek redemption, yet your soul is bound by sin. I offer you a chance, a new life in a new world. Will you accept? Kokushibo's fragmented thoughts swirled. A new life? A chance to break free from his chains. He did not hesitate. Yes. Light consumed him. The cries of a newborn pierced the night. Kokushibo awoke in a strange, fragile body. His vision was hazy, yet he could feel the raw, potent energy coursing through him. It was unlike the blood demon art he had wielded before. This power was more primal, more instinctive. He tried to move but found his limbs weak and uncoordinated. Panic surged within him before he forced himself to calm down. He was no longer Kokushibo. That name belonged to a monster. Here, he was something else. Naruto. Time passed slowly. The sensations of hunger, warmth, and cold were alien yet familiar. The cries of this new body's voice were involuntary, yet the reactions they drew from others were predictable. He quickly learned that the world was harsh. The villagers' glares burned hotter than the sun, their whispers cut deeper than any blade. Demon. Monster. Curse. Words he had once embraced now filled him with unease. He saw their fear and disgust. It mirrored what he had once inflicted upon humans in his old world. The irony was not lost on him. Despite his infant form, Kokushibo's instincts remained sharp. When a drunken villager dared to throw a rock at him, his body reacted. Dark, crimson energy flared from within, shattering the stone midair. Gasps echoed, and the villagers fled, leaving the infant Naruto alone once more. The years crawled by. Naruto's body grew, but so did his awareness. The energy within him pulsed like a heartbeat, stronger with each passing day. His eyes, those cursed, monstrous eyes, began to change. At first, it was subtle. A faint glow at night, a hint of red when angered. But soon, patterns formed, intricate and hauntingly beautiful, like the markings he once bore as Kokushibo. He learned to hide them, closing his eyes when danger approached and masking his presence as best as he could. But the whispers never stopped. They followed him like shadows. Despite the villagers' hatred, Naruto sought knowledge. He devoured scrolls and books, absorbing information about chakra, jutsus, and the history of this strange world. He saw similarities and differences, recognizing elements that mirrored the techniques of demon slayers and demons alike. Yet, What haunted him most was the reflection in the water. Each time he looked, Kokushibo stared back. One night, hunger drove Naruto to sneak into the forest. The shadows welcomed him, familiar and comforting. He hunted small animals, his senses guiding him as though he had never lost his demonic instincts. The taste of blood stirred something primal within him, and he recoiled in horror. "No," he whispered, clutching his trembling hands. "Not again." But the hunger persisted. It was not ordinary hunger, it was the thirst for power, for survival. Naruto trained in secret, pushing his body beyond its limits. He practiced the forms he remembered from his past life, wielding sticks as makeshift swords. His movements grew sharper, deadlier. He blended his old techniques with the chakra control he studied, creating something new, something terrifying. At night, he dreamed of battles long past. The faces of his victims haunted him, but so did Yoriaki's smile. It was a reminder of what he had lost, of what he still sought. By the age of 6, Naruto could no longer hide his strength. When a group of older boys cornered him in the alley, he lashed out instinctively. His hand moved faster than sight, dislocating one boy's shoulder and sending another crashing into the wall. The villagers' fear escalated. They whispered about curses and demons, and Naruto felt the weight of their hatred. Yet, a part of him welcomed it. Fear was power. Fear kept enemies at bay. Still, doubts lingered. Was he doomed to repeat his past mistakes? Could he resist the pull of darkness? He wandered the forest more frequently, drawn to its solitude. One day, he stumbled upon an ancient shrine, its stone walls etched with symbols he could barely comprehend. A faint hum resonated from within, calling to him. As he stepped inside, memories searched visions of rituals, sacrifices, and forbidden power. He recognized it as both a warning and an opportunity. If he was to survive in this world, he needed strength. Strength to protect himself. Strength to control the hunger. He reached out, and the world shifted. Naruto awoke to find the markings on his body had deepened. His eyes burned with power, and his chakra pulsed like a living entity. The shrine had awakened something dormant within him, something that made him more than human. When he returned to the village, the stares intensified. The villagers knew he had changed. They could feel it. But this time, Naruto did not cower. He met their gazes head-on, his monstrous eyes glowing faintly in the dusk. Fear rippled through them, and they stepped aside. Naruto smirked. For the first time, he felt in control. Yet, as he walked away, a single thought lingered in his mind. Will this power save me, or destroy me? The moonlight filtered through the cracked windows of the small, isolated room where Naruto spent most of his time, away from the bustle of the village that despised him. It was a quiet night, the only sound being the rhythmic tapping of his fingers on the wooden floor as he sat in the corner, contemplating his existence. His life was nothing more than a series of cold stares and harsh words from the people who were supposed to protect him. They hated him. They feared him. They called him a monster, and they were right. After all, the Nine Tails was sealed within him, an uncontrollable force that had nearly destroyed Konoha years ago. Yet, as much as they reviled him, there was something deep inside him that refused to break. Every insult, every strike, only fueled the fire inside his chest. And as he sat there, a strange sensation began to stir within him, an ancient presence that reached out from the depths of his mind. Naruto. The voice was deep, cold, and unmistakable. It carried the weight of centuries, the echo of a time long past. It was a voice Naruto had never heard before, but it was one that seemed to resonate with the part of him he didn't fully understand. The presence was Kokushibo, the moon-breathing swordsman from another era, a being of untold power, and now, something more. His consciousness had found its way into Naruto's mind after the sealing of the Nine Tails, and since then, it had quietly observed, waiting for the right moment to make its influence known. "Get up," the voice commanded. "Do not waste time in the darkness of your misery. Power is the only way to rise above them." Naruto's eyes snapped open, the familiar sting of isolation and pain clawing at his heart. But instead of sinking into despair, he felt a strange resolve take root. Kokushibo's presence was no longer a mere whisper, it was something that demanded his attention, his obedience. Naruto stood up, the floor creaking beneath his feet, and wiped away the tears that had silently fallen down his face. This was not the first time he had been subjected to such feelings, but it would be the last time he let them control him. "I will not be weak," Naruto muttered to himself, his voice rough but determined. "I will show them, show everyone that I am not their monster. I will make them fear me." Kokushibo's presence grew stronger, swirling around Naruto, guiding his movements, his thoughts, and his actions. It was an odd sensation, partly comforting and partly terrifying. The voice of the ancient swordsman became a force within Naruto, pushing him forward, urging him to embrace the discipline and power he had once abandoned. With a slow, deliberate movement, Naruto drew a kunai from his pouch. He held it before him, staring at the dark metal as Kokushibo's voice rang in his ears. "Moon breathing," Kokushibo's voice instructed. "Use it. Let the sword become an extension of yourself." Naruto's grip tightened on the kunai as he focused his energy on the blade. The kunai, a simple tool in the hands of a ninja, felt different now, heavy with power, raw potential, and a strange, unsettling presence. His body trembled as the air around him seemed to grow colder, darker. The kunai pulsed with an energy unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was as if the blade itself was alive, waiting for his command. Naruto raised the kunai above his head, feeling the moonlight glimmer on its edge. Then, without thinking, he swung it downward, and the air itself seemed to shudder. A crescent-shaped slash of energy erupted from the blade, cutting through the wooden floor like it was paper. The force of the attack sent a gust of wind through the room, and Naruto staggered back, stunned by the sheer power he had unleashed. "Impressive," Kokushibo's voice murmured in approval. "But you have only scratched the surface. The true strength lies in your ability to control it." Naruto's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the damage he had caused. The floor was marked with a deep, jagged gash, and the air smelled of burning wood. The power he had just unleashed felt foreign, dangerous, and intoxicating. He could sense that this was only the beginning. He could feel the moon's energy flowing through him, giving him strength he had never imagined. And then, as if to test his resolve, there was a knock on the door. Naruto froze, his eyes narrowing. The villagers. They had found him, once again, seeking to remind him of his place. The whispers, the hatred, the disgust, they would come for him every time he showed the smallest sign of defiance. "Do not hesitate," Kokushibo's voice urged him. "Let them come. It is time to show them your strength." Naruto stepped toward the door, his grip tightening around the kunai. He could hear the sounds of the villagers outside, their jeers, their taunts, their hate-filled voices. He could almost taste their fear already, and it sent a thrill through him. When the door was kicked open, a group of angry villagers stood in the doorway. They had torches and pitchforks, ready to punish him once again for the crime of simply existing. They sneered at him, their eyes full of disdain. "You're nothing but a monster," one of them shouted. "You should have died with the 9 tails." Naruto's lips curled into a dangerous smile. Without a word, he raised his hand, summoning the power of Kokushibo's moon breathing. The air around him became thick with tension, and the villagers hesitated, sensing that something was terribly wrong. But it was too late. Naruto moved faster than they could react. With a single, swift motion, he slashed the air before him. The crescent-shaped wave of energy sliced through the room like a blade through silk. The villagers cried out in shock and fear, but the attack didn't stop. It cut through their torches, their pitchforks, and the air itself, leaving nothing but stunned silence in its wake. Naruto stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily. His heart raced, but the sense of power was intoxicating. The villagers, now cowering, looked at him with a mixture of fear and awe. They had come to punish him, but instead, they had been humbled by his strength. You monster. One of them gasped. Naruto's smile grew, but it wasn't one of happiness. It was a smile of cruel satisfaction. He had shown them, and now, they feared him. They would never forget the power he had unleashed. And that fear would be the first step toward his ultimate goal. I'm not your monster, Naruto said, his voice cold and full of malice. I'm something far worse. The villagers fled, leaving Naruto standing alone in the room, the lingering scent of blood and smoke in the air. His heart pounded with excitement, but something deeper stirred within him, something darker. This was only the beginning. He had tasted the power that would make them fear him, and he would not stop until every one of them trembled at his name. As the days passed, Naruto began to hone his newfound abilities. Kokushibo's presence guided him, helping him refine his control over moon breathing. He practiced tirelessly, pushing his body to its limits, testing his strength against the world around him. Each time he was wounded, Kokushibo's power healed him, leaving him with scars that only served as reminders of his progress. And with each passing day, Naruto's resolve grew stronger. He would never be weak again. He would rise above the hatred, the fear, and the cruelty that had been thrust upon him. He would make the world bend to his will, and nothing would stand in his way. The villagers might have thought they could break him, but they had only awakened something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The childhood of shadows was over. Now, Naruto was ready to embrace the darkness within him. And with the power of Kokushibo's moon breathing at his side, there was no force in the world that could ever hope to stop him. The forest of death loomed before Naruto, its dense trees and thick underbrush hiding the dark secrets of its name. It was a place whispered about in Konoha, where dangers lurked at every corner and few returned unscathed. But for Naruto, it was nothing more than a place to train, to grow stronger, to perfect the power that was beginning to feel like a part of his very soul. He had discovered the forest's entrance by accident, while wandering the village on one of his many solitary walks, trying to escape the stares of the villagers. It wasn't long before he found himself drawn to it, the ancient trees calling to him in a way that felt almost unnatural. As though something in the forest itself was aware of him, waiting for him to enter. The moment Naruto stepped into the forest, something inside him stirred. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the sound of his footsteps was swallowed by the dense canopy above. But there was another presence here, one that felt like it had been waiting for him. His breath quickened as he made his way deeper into the heart of the forest, instinct guiding him. He came across an old, abandoned training ground, hidden beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient tree. The area was overgrown, but it held an undeniable energy, as if it had been used by someone powerful long ago. A faint glimmer of something metallic caught his eye, half buried beneath the dirt and leaves. Curious, Naruto knelt down and began digging. The earth was soft and damp beneath his hands, and as he cleared away the dirt, his fingers brushed against something cold and hard. It was the hilt of a sword, its edge worn by time but still intact. He gripped it tightly, pulling it free from its earthen prison. The moment his fingers wrapped around the sword's hilt, a surge of power coursed through him. It was unlike anything he had felt before, a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate deep within his chest. The sword was beautiful in its simplicity, long and slender, with a blade that shimmered faintly, almost as if it were made from moonlight itself. As he held it, he could feel Kokushibo's presence within him, urging him to wield it, to embrace it. The sword felt as if it had been made for him, an extension of the demonic power that had awakened within him. With a deep breath, Naruto drew the blade, feeling the weight of it in his hand. His heart raced as he raised the sword, a quiet whisper in the back of his mind telling him to strike. Without thinking, he swung the blade through the air. A crescent-shaped wave of energy erupted from the sword, slicing through the trees with ease. The power of Kokushibo's moon breathing flowed through him, channeling through the sword and into the world around him. Naruto stood in stunned silence, staring at the destruction he had wrought. The trees were split in two, their trunks falling with a crash that echoed through the forest. The blade hummed with energy, and Naruto could feel the sword's connection to him deepening. This was the power he had been searching for, a power that transcended anything he had known before. Well done, Kokushibo's voice echoed in his mind. This is the strength you have always had within you. The power to dominate, to control, to carve your own destiny. Naruto's lips curled into a faint smile, the thrill of power coursing through him. He could feel the blood of warriors long past flowing through the blade, guiding him, teaching him. Every movement felt like a dance, a precise and deadly rhythm that he had been born to follow. The crescent slashes felt natural now, like an extension of his own body. For hours, Naruto practiced, his body moving with inhuman speed and grace. The sword became an extension of himself, its power growing with each swing. The crescent-shaped waves of energy became more powerful, more refined, cutting through the forest with devastating precision. His movements were fluid, as if he had been wielding the blade for years, not just hours. And as he trained, he could feel something inside him changing. The coldness, the emptiness that had always been a part of him, was filling with something new, something darker, more potent. It was a hunger, a thirst for more power, for more strength. He had only begun to tap into the depths of his abilities, and already, he could sense the fear his power would inspire in those who dared to oppose him. The following days passed in a blur of training and growth. The forest became his sanctuary, a place where he could hone his skills without fear of the villagers' hatred. But as his power grew, so did the fear that Konoha had of him. Whispers spread like wildfire, and soon, Naruto was no longer just a pariah. He was a threat. The first attempt on his life came late one evening. Naruto was returning from the forest, his mind still lost in thoughts of his training, when he sensed a presence watching him from the shadows. He turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw a group of villagers emerging from the darkness, their faces twisted with fear and malice. They carried weapons, knives, pitchforks, anything they could find, and they had come to end the monster that had haunted their village for too long. You shouldn't exist, one of them spat, his voice full of venom. This is the end, demon. Naruto's lips curled into a smile. The fear in their eyes was palpable, but he could see their resolve, their desperation to rid themselves of him. He didn't need to speak. His actions would say everything. In a flash, Naruto drew his sword, the blade gleaming in the moonlight. He moved faster than they could react, his body a blur of motion. With a single, precise slash, he sent one of the attackers flying backward, the crescent-shaped energy wave cleaving through the air with deadly force. Another tried to lunge at him, but Naruto sidestepped effortlessly, his blade flashing in a graceful arc as it severed the man's weapon in two. The remaining villagers hesitated, fear seizing them as they realized they were no match for him. But it was too late for them. Naruto was no longer the scared, lonely child they had once bullied. He was something far worse, and his power was beyond their comprehension. With a swift motion, he dispatched the remaining attackers, his sword cutting through the air with terrifying precision. He didn't kill them. He didn't need to. He only needed to make them understand their fear, their hatred, their desperation, all of it, would be his to command. The villagers fled, their faces pale with terror. Naruto stood in the center of the street, his sword gleaming, his breath steady. He had done it not just for survival, but for dominance. They would fear him from now on. They would know that he was not someone to be trifled with. But as Naruto turned to leave, something unexpected happened. A soft voice reached his ears, delicate and unsure. Naruto-kun. Naruto paused, his heart skipping a beat. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. It was Hinata. She was standing there, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Her pale lavender eyes met his with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. You're so strong," she whispered. "I've never seen anyone move like that before." Naruto's gaze softened, though he tried to hide it. The words she spoke weren't full of fear, but something else, something closer to awe. It was a feeling he wasn't used to, especially not from someone like her. He studied her for a moment, noticing the way she looked at him, her gaze filled with something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear. It was something different. "Why aren't you afraid?" Naruto asked, his voice rough and cold. Hinata hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I can see it. You're not a monster, Naruto-kun. You're just alone. But you don't have to be." Naruto's heart twisted at her words. It was the first time someone had said something so simple yet so profound. He had been alone for so long that he hadn't realized how much he longed for someone to see him for who he truly was, not just the demon they all feared. His cold exterior faltered for just a moment, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir within him, a connection, however fleeting, with another person. Hinata took a tentative step forward, her eyes never leaving his. I want to be your friend, Naruto-kun. I want to understand you." Naruto didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at her, studying her earnest expression. Maybe, just maybe, she could be the ally he had always needed. But in the depths of his heart, the demon within him stirred, and a voice whispered in the back of his mind. "Do not forget what you are, Naruto. Power is your only true ally." Naruto nodded, a cold smirk forming on his lips as he turned away. "I don't need friends, Hinata," he said, his voice harder than before. "But maybe you're right. Maybe we can help each other." And as they walked in silence, Naruto couldn't help but wonder if, perhaps, this was the beginning of something more, something that would change everything. The sun hung low over the village, casting long shadows across the streets of Konoha. A new chapter in Naruto's life had begun, one that he had both dreaded and anticipated for years. The academy. It was where every young shinobi started their journey, where children like him were molded into the future protectors of the village. For most, it was a place of camaraderie, friendship, and growth. But for Naruto, it was nothing more than another stage for his rise to power. As he walked toward the academy, his mind was clouded with the same familiar bitterness and the hunger for strength that had driven him all these years. The whispers and the stares from the villagers didn't fade, they never would. But now, it was different. Now, he held a weapon more powerful than any jutsu or chakra: fear. His power, the sharp blade of moon breathing and the demonic energy that flowed through him, had begun to shape him into something else entirely. He wasn't just a child anymore. He was something to be feared, and that was exactly how he intended to be seen. Naruto entered the academy with an air of confidence that instantly set him apart from the other students. As he walked into the classroom, the entire room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward him, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had paused. No one dared to speak. Even the instructors, usually so composed, exchanged nervous glances. They had heard of him, of course. The child of the demon fox, the boy who wielded strange powers. But to see him up close, to witness the chilling aura that surrounded him, was something else entirely. He took a seat at the back of the room, his gaze scanning the others. Sasuke Uchiha, the brooding heir to the Uchiha clan, was seated near the front, his eyes filled with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Sakura Haruno, with her bright pink hair and eager eyes, watched him from the corner of her vision, and Ino Yamanaka, ever the one to seek attention, was already eyeing him with interest. Naruto's reputation preceded him, but that didn't stop the whispers from circulating. As the day began, he could sense the unease in the air. It wasn't just fear, it was awe. They were afraid of him, but they were also drawn to him, fascinated by the darkness that seemed to radiate from him. The instructor, Iriko Mino, cleared his throat and started the day's lesson. The curriculum was simple: basic ninjutsu, basic taijutsu, and strategy. It wasn't anything that Naruto hadn't already mastered in his years of self-imposed training, but he sat quietly, observing his classmates. He didn't need to try. They would soon understand his power. He was the one who would shape the narrative, not the other way around. When the time came for physical training, Naruto stood up, stretching his arms and rolling his shoulders. The others followed suit, all eager to show off their skills, their budding potential. Sasuke was the first to move, his Sharingan flickering to life as he effortlessly dispatched a training dummy with a few well-placed kuno. A few gasps of admiration echoed through the room, but Naruto barely spared him a glance. It wasn't until Naruto stepped forward to demonstrate his own technique that the real attention shifted. The instructors had heard rumors about his strength, but seeing it firsthand was a different matter entirely. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The sensation of Kokushibo's power resonated within him, and his sword felt like an extension of his very soul. Without any further warning, he raised his hand and summoned the crescent-shaped energy wave of moon breathing. The air in the room grew thick with tension as the blade of energy tore through the training dummies in front of him, effortlessly slicing through them as though they were made of paper. The force of the slash sent a shockwave rippling through the academy, and several students stumbled backward, their eyes wide with disbelief. The blade dissipated into nothingness, but the aftermath was enough to leave the entire class in stunned silence. "Tch, that's impossible," Irika muttered under his breath, his face pale as he took a cautious step forward. How did you?" Naruto smirked, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. He knew what they were thinking. They were all terrified, but they couldn't help but be in awe of his power. It was a weapon that no one could ignore. He was no longer a mere student, he was something else, something they couldn't fathom. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he watched Naruto with a growing sense of envy. The young Uchiha had always prided himself on his strength, on his clan's legacy, but seeing Naruto wield power so effortlessly, so casually, was a blow to his pride. The seed of rivalry was planted in that moment, and Sasuke's desire to surpass Naruto began to fester within him. The rest of the students reacted in a similar way, though they expressed their awe in different ways. Sakura's eyes sparkled with admiration, and she couldn't hide the blush that crept up her cheeks. She had always been drawn to strength, and what Naruto had displayed was beyond anything she had ever seen. Ino, ever the opportunist, saw it as a chance to make her own name shine in comparison to the mysterious, aloof boy. But Naruto paid them no mind. He had no interest in their admiration. He wasn't here for friendship. He was here for dominance, and he would have it. The faint smirk never left his face as he observed his classmates. They were weak, each one of them. They didn't stand a chance against him. In the following days, the story of Naruto's power spread throughout the academy like wildfire. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and the fear in the eyes of his classmates was palpable. He knew how to play the game. With every interaction, he carefully manipulated their perceptions, ensuring that they viewed him as something beyond a mere child. He was a force to be reckoned with, a weapon that no one could afford to challenge. The most notable incident came when a group of bullies, young, ignorant students who had thought to provoke him, tried to intimidate him one afternoon. They were under the mistaken belief that Naruto was just another weakling they could push around. They had no idea what they were walking into. One of the boys, a lanky, arrogant child, shoved Naruto from behind as he passed. "Hey, freak," he sneered. What's it like to have the demon fox inside you? Bet it makes you feel like you're special or something. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't need to. With a slow, deliberate turn, he raised his hand and drew his blade. The boy's eyes widened in terror, but it was too late. Naruto didn't hesitate. The crescent slash erupted from the blade, cutting through the air like a ribbon of pure destruction. The bully screamed as the energy wave struck the ground in front of him, narrowly missing his feet but sending a shockwave that sent him and his friends stumbling back. The other bullies looked at each other, fear creeping into their eyes. They had seen Naruto's power, and now they knew better than to challenge him. But Naruto wasn't finished. He took a step forward, his gaze locking onto the boy who had shoved him. His voice was cold, unfeeling. "Try that again, and I won't miss," Naruto warned, his tone sending a chill through the group. "You'll regret it?" The bullies, their bravado shattered, turned, and fled, not daring to look back. Naruto's eyes lingered on them for a moment, his expression unreadable. This was the power he had always craved, the ability to break anyone who dared to challenge him. The moment they were gone, a hushed silence fell over the academy grounds. The students who had witnessed the scene were left in stunned silence, their eyes wide with fear and awe. They had just seen the true extent of Naruto's power, and they knew that they would never forget it. As Naruto turned to leave, his gaze flickered briefly toward Hinata, who had been watching from the sidelines. Unlike the others, she didn't seem afraid. Her eyes met his with a mixture of admiration and curiosity, and there was something else, a quiet understanding, as though she saw something within him that no one else did. Naruto didn't acknowledge her, but he could feel the weight of her gaze. He didn't need friends, but there was something in her eyes that made him wonder. Maybe, just maybe, she was someone who could see beyond a fear, beyond the demon that everyone else saw. But for now, he had a reputation to uphold. His fame was growing, his power unmatched, and soon, the whole village would understand one thing: Naruto Uzumaki was a force to be reckoned with, and he was not to be crossed. And as he walked through the academy gates, the whispers followed him once more. The village of Konoha stood under a cloudless sky, its streets bustling with the usual hustle and bustle of daily life. But today, there was an unmistakable sense of tension in the air and excitement, a sense of expectation. For the students of the academy, today was the day of graduation, the day they would prove their worth and officially become shinobi. Naruto, however, was far from nervous. If anything, he felt a quiet thrill building within him. He had already mastered every technique the academy had to offer, and then some. What lay before him was nothing more than a formality, just another step toward his ultimate goal. He wasn't just going to pass the exam. He was going to dominate it. He was going to show them exactly who he was, who he had always been. A force beyond anything they had ever encountered. The exam was simple enough, designed to test the most basic of shinobi skills, the ability to perform basic jutsu, execute precise taijutsu, and demonstrate control over chakra. For most students, it would be an intense but manageable challenge. But for Naruto, it was beneath him. The teachers were already wary of him, already afraid of his abilities, but none of them truly understood the extent of what he could do. As the test began, Naruto's eyes narrowed in concentration, and he calmly assessed the situation. His classmates, eager but nervous, struggled to perform their techniques. Some faltered under pressure, others stumbled through their jutsu. But for Naruto, it was effortless. His hands formed seals with the grace of a seasoned shinobi, each movement precise, controlled, and powerful. His chakra flowed with unnatural ease, and when he performed his modified version of moon breathing, the sheer power behind the technique caused the air around him to ripple. A crescent-shaped wave of energy erupted from his blade, cutting through the air with a sound like thunder. The ground beneath him trembled as the blade sliced through a training dummy with ease, the force of the strike sending shock waves through the area. The teachers gasped in shock, unable to hide their astonishment. The modified moon breathing technique was not something they had ever seen before. Its destructive power, its fluidity, its precision, everything about it was beyond what any of them could have imagined. Naruto stood tall, his gaze cold and impassive as the test continued. His classmates, still struggling with their own tasks, looked on in awe and fear. Sasuke Uchiha, ever the proud and competitive one, glared at him from the corner of his eye, his fists clenched. The rivalry between the two had been growing for some time now, and it was clear that Naruto had not only surpassed him in skill but in presence. Sakura Haruno, meanwhile, watched with wide eyes. Her admiration for Naruto had only grown since their first encounter, but now, seeing the extent of his power in such a controlled and effortless display, she couldn't help but be both fascinated and terrified. Ino, too, was drawn to him, her eyes filled with a mix of envy and awe. But Naruto didn't care about them. He didn't need their approval. He was already more powerful than anyone in the room, and the only thing that mattered to him was making that abundantly clear. As the exam concluded, the teachers huddled together, whispering among themselves, their faces tense with worry. They had hoped that Naruto would be just like the other students, but the demonstration of his abilities had shattered their expectations. He wasn't just another student. He was something different, something dangerous. Naruto smirked as he watched them confer, the sense of power he felt surging through him. He had passed the exam easily, but he wasn't content with that. He wanted more. He wanted to see how far he could push this, how far he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. And the first step toward that goal was the team assignments. The moment the names were announced, Naruto's eyes flickered to the front. He wasn't surprised when he heard his own name followed by Team 7. It seemed fitting. It was the beginning of something new, something that would allow him to shape his own destiny. But it wasn't just about him, it was about the others, too. The team members. Kakashi Hatake, the team leader, was a known figure, a respected Chunin who was famous for his strength and his laid-back attitude. But what Kakashi didn't know was that Naruto wasn't interested in simply following orders. Naruto was going to test them, see how far they could be bent to his will. As Naruto made his way to the meeting point for Team 7, he could already sense the tension in the air. Sasuke, always proud and driven, stood by the window, his gaze distant. Sakura, ever eager to prove herself, fidgeted nervously, glancing between the boys. And then there was Kakashi, who leaned against the wall, his head tilted lazily to one side, the mask covering his face hiding whatever expression he had beneath it. Naruto entered the room without a word, his presence commanding attention. The others turned to look at him, and Sasuke's eyes narrowed with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Sakura smiled awkwardly, trying to muster the courage to speak, but Naruto's cold gaze silenced her. "Are you ready to begin?" Kakashi asked, his voice casual but carrying an undertone of curiosity. Naruto didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a moment to survey his new team. They were strong in their own right, but they were nothing compared to him. He would have to make them understand that. He would make them see who was truly in charge. "I'm ready," Naruto said, his voice smooth and confident. The first mission was simple enough, a standard escort mission to the outskirts of the village. But to Naruto, it was a test. A test of how far he could push his new teammates, how far he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. The moment they were on the road, he began to subtly assert his dominance. As the mission progressed, Naruto's brutal combat style began to reveal itself. They were ambushed by a group of bandits halfway through the journey, rough, untrained fighters who thought they could take advantage of a team of fresh genin. It was a mistake they wouldn't live to regret. The moment the bandits attacked, Naruto's hand shot out, summoning his sword. A crescent-shaped energy wave sliced through the air, tearing through the bandits with a deadly precision that left no room for escape. They didn't stand a chance. The fight was over before it even began. Sakura and Sasuke watched in shock as the bandits were reduced to little more than bloody remnants. Sakura's face paled as the violence unfolded in front of her. She had never seen such brutality, and the sight made her stomach churn. But Naruto, unfazed, stood over the wreckage with a sense of satisfaction. He didn't care about the blood or the carnage. This was a display of his power, and it was meant to send a message not just to the bandits, but to his team as well. Is this really necessary? Sakura asked, her voice shaky as she approached Naruto, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. Naruto turned to her, his gaze cold and calculating. If you want to survive in this world, you need to understand one thing, he said, his tone low and chilling. There is no room for weakness. The moment you show mercy, you make yourself a target. Remember that. Sakura opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know how to argue with him. There was a coldness to Naruto that she had never seen before, and it terrified her. Meanwhile, Hinata, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, couldn't tear her gaze away. She had always admired strength, but seeing Naruto in action, seeing the power he wielded with such casual ease, was something else entirely. There was something raw, something dangerous about him that fascinated her. Unlike the others, she didn't fear him. She didn't flinch at the violence. In a strange way, she respected it. Kakashi, watching from a distance, began to grow suspicious. He had seen many things in his time as a shinobi, but Naruto's actions were raising more questions than answers. There was something about the boy, something he couldn't quite place, that set him apart from every other genin he had ever met. Kakashi had been told about Naruto's power, of course, but this was something else entirely. He would keep an eye on Naruto, that much was certain. Something told him that the young shinobi was far more than he seemed. The mist hung thick around him, the air dense and humid, its oppressive weight pressing down on Team 7 as they made their way toward the bridge. Naruto walked at the front of the group, his senses sharp and his mind already focused on what lay ahead. He had been through countless battles, each one sharpening his skills and refining his sense of power, but this mission was different. There was something about the way the mist seemed to wrap around him, as if it were hiding something far more dangerous than the typical bandit ambush or simple confrontation. Kakashi, ever the strategist, kept his head on a swivel, his Sharingan eye scanning the environment for any signs of danger. Behind him, Sasuke and Sakura were visibly on edge. They were still new to the brutal realities of being a shinobi, and the pressure of the mission was beginning to weigh heavily on them. However, Naruto, despite his stoic expression, could feel the faint stirrings of excitement in his chest. There was something exhilarating about the unknown, about the promise of a fight that would push him further, make him grow even more powerful. Their mission had initially seemed straightforward. Escort Tajuna, the bridge builder, to his home in the land of waves. But the moment they entered the mist, everything changed. The presence of an enemy, someone powerful, had made itself known. An aura that was both menacing and strangely familiar. Kakashi's hand instinctively moved to his kunai pouch, his gaze flickering to Naruto, who stood still, his senses fully attuned to the surroundings. Naruto had already felt it, the presence of an opponent unlike any other he had faced. It wasn't just the chakra or the scent of danger in the air. No, this was something different. Something far more dangerous. Stay alert, Kakashi said quietly, his tone laced with a rare edge of caution. We're not alone. Before anyone could respond, a figure appeared out of the mist. A tall man with a sword that could only be described as monstrous, Savuzamamakai, one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. His presence radiated deadly intent, and his eyes gleamed with the knowledge of countless battles. Looks like you've already realized who I am, Zabuza said, his voice cold, cutting through the silence. You've made a grave mistake coming here. I'm going to enjoy killing you all. Kakashi stepped forward, his Sharingan already activated as he faced the rogue ninja. I don't think so. You won't get away with this, Zabuza. Naruto watched quietly, his gaze sharp as he analyzed the situation. He wasn't afraid. In fact, a part of him welcomed this challenge. He could sense the power emanating from Zabuza, the strength of someone who had clearly lived a life of bloodshed and violence. But Naruto wasn't just a simple genin. He had Kokushibo's presence within him, the power of the moon-breathing techniques pulsing beneath his skin, ready to be unleashed. With a fluid motion, Zabuza lunged toward them, his enormous sword cutting through the air like a deadly arc. Naruto's eyes narrowed. His body moved before his mind had fully processed the attack. He effortlessly sidestepped Zabuza's strike, the blade whistling through the space where he had just been standing. The movement was so fluid, so natural, that it almost seemed as though Naruto had anticipated the attack. Impressive, Zabuza mused, not missing the precision with which Naruto dodged. But he was still a predator, and the scent of blood was on the wind. He wasn't about to let them escape so easily. Naruto's expression remained impassive. His hand twitched toward the hilt of his sword. The moon-breathing techniques flooded his senses, awakening even more of Kokushibo's abilities. He was ready to strike. Without warning, Naruto's blade flashed, and a crescent-shaped slash tore through the air, aiming directly at Zabuza. The force of the strike sent a shockwave through the mist, the air itself seeming to bend around the power of the slash. Zabuza barely managed to parry it with his sword, but the impact was enough to send him stumbling back, his eyes widening in shock. What the hell? He muttered under his breath, struggling to regain his footing. Naruto stood tall, his eyes cold, his sword still in hand, poised for another attack. There was no hesitation, no doubt in his movements. He was in control. He could feel the raw power of Kokushibo's techniques surging through him, flooding every part of his being, and he knew that with each strike, he was pushing himself further into the realm of the extraordinary. Zabuza, for the first time, felt a flicker of doubt in his chest. He had fought many strong opponents, but this was something else entirely. There was no panic in Naruto's movements, no uncertainty. Just a cold, ruthless determination that mirrored his own. But as a seasoned warrior, Zabuza wasn't about to be outclassed so easily. You're good, Zabuza admitted, his voice gruff, his tone filled with begrudging respect. But you're still a kid. And that means you've got a lot to learn. Naruto's lips curled into a faint smile, though his eyes remained impassive. I've learned all I need to, he said, his voice low and steady. And I'm not a kid. I'm your superior. Zabuza's eyes flashed with fury, and before he could respond, another figure emerged from the mist. Haku, the delicate-looking young woman who had been silently observing from the sidelines, now stepped forward. Her eyes locked onto Naruto with a strange intensity, her expression unreadable. Naruto's gaze shifted toward her, his senses immediately honing in on the presence she exuded. There was power in her, too, though it was different from Zabuza's. It was more refined, more subtle, but still potent. It was then that Naruto realized that Haku wasn't just some innocent accomplice, she was a skilled ninja in her own right, someone who could hold her own in battle. You don't have to do this, Haku, Naruto said, his voice softer, though it still carried the weight of his authority. You're not like him. Haku's expression faltered for a brief moment, the cold mask she wore slipping ever so slightly. She glanced at Zabuza, then back at Naruto, her gaze softening. You're wrong, she said quietly. I'm his loyal servant. I do what I must. Naruto studied her for a moment, sensing the inner turmoil she was hiding. There was conflict in her eyes, a conflict that mirrored his own. He could see it, the struggle between duty and desire for something more. Then why follow him? Naruto asked, his voice carrying an edge of something unspoken. You don't need to be his tool. You can choose something different. You can choose to be free. Haku's eyes wavered, the doubt in them growing stronger. She didn't answer immediately, instead turning her gaze towards Zabuza. The tension between them was palpable, a silent exchange passing between the two. Zabuza, however, was growing impatient. He was a man of action, not words, and the sight of Naruto's growing influence over Haku was starting to irritate him. Enough of this, Zabuza snapped, charging at Naruto once more, his sword raised high. But before he could close the distance, Naruto's blade flashed again, and with a single, swift strike, Zabuza was thrown back. The force of the attack was enough to send him crashing to the ground, blood trickling from a deep cut along his side. Haku, still standing in the mist, watched in silence. The realization hit her that Zabuza, for all his strength and arrogance, was no match for Naruto. The boy who had been nothing more than a nuisance in her eyes was now a powerful force, someone who commanded not only physical strength but also an influence that could change the course of her life. Zabuza lay on the ground, groaning, blood staining his clothes. His body, battered and broken from the attack, could no longer continue. The fight had been short but brutal, and there was no longer any doubt in his mind. This battle had been lost. Zabuza. Haku whispered, her voice breaking as she kneeled beside him. Her hands trembled as she checked his pulse, but it was already too late. Zabuza's once fierce eyes slowly faded, and with his death, Haku's world seemed to come crashing down around her. She was alone, with no one left to serve, no one left to protect. The purpose she had lived for had been shattered in an instant. Naruto stood silently behind her, watching as Haku mourned her fallen master. He felt no satisfaction from her loss, but rather a strange sense of understanding. He had been alone for much of his life, too, abandoned by the world that feared him. And though he had embraced that loneliness, he understood what it meant to long for something, someone to call his own. Slowly, he approached her, his footsteps soft but purposeful. Haku looked up at him, her eyes red from tears, and he saw the change in her. There was no resistance now, no defiance. Just an acceptance of the inevitable. You don't have to be alone anymore, Naruto said, his voice low, yet strangely gentle. You can come with me. I can offer you something more than this, more than serving someone who never cared for you. Haku's gaze softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly look at him not as an enemy, not as a threat, but as someone who could offer her a new path. She nodded silently, a quiet acceptance that would shape her fate in ways she hadn't yet realized. With that, Naruto had gained something more than just a powerful ally. He had gained the first member of his harem, a woman who would serve him with unwavering loyalty, a woman who had been shaped by pain but was now ready to embrace something far greater. And so, the demon in the mist began to rise. Naruto stood alone in the dense forest near Konoha, the familiar scent of earth and pine filling the air. The wind whispered softly through the leaves, creating a peaceful atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the dangerous edge Naruto had cultivated within himself. His thoughts, however, were far from calm. His mind was sharp, calculating, and relentlessly focused on the future, his future. For the first time since he had truly embraced the darkness within him, he had a plan. A plan that involved not only his rise to power but also those he would bring along with him. People were tools, after all, and Naruto understood better than anyone that strength came from influence. Those who served him would be rewarded, and those who were weak, those who failed to recognize his superiority, would fall by the wayside. Hinata. Temari. Sakura. Ino. They were all important pieces of the puzzle, and he had been carefully shaping their paths, manipulating their desires, and offering them the one thing they all needed: power. Hinata was the first to catch his attention, not just for her quiet strength but because she had always been overlooked. A shy, introverted girl, she lacked the outward aggression that many shinobi had. But Naruto had seen something else in her, the potential to be something greater, something more powerful than she could ever imagine. He had begun training her in secret, away from the prying eyes of the village. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting an ethereal glow across the clearing where Naruto waited. He had told Hinata to meet him here, promising her that he would show her the path to greater strength. She arrived quietly, her dark eyes searching the shadows before she saw him. "Naruto-kun," she whispered softly, as if afraid to disturb the tranquility of the night. Naruto's gaze was piercing, his eyes reflecting a cold determination that mirrored the intensity of the power that coursed through him. "Hinata," he said in a tone that left no room for argument. "I'm going to show you how to unlock your true potential. You need to stop holding back. You're capable of more than you think." Hinata's heart raced, a mixture of awe and anxiety settling within her. She had always admired Naruto from afar, seeing him as someone strong, someone who had never given up despite the hardships he faced. And now, here he was, offering her something that no one else ever had. A chance to be better. A chance to be something more. He could see the conflict in her eyes. She was hesitant, unsure, but Naruto was patient. He knew that all it would take was the right words to convince her. "Hinata," he began again, stepping closer, "do you want to be weak forever? Do you want to stay in the shadows, always afraid to show what you're truly capable of? I can help you. But you have to trust me." Hinata swallowed, her breath catching in her throat. The warmth of his presence, the intensity of his gaze, made her feel something stir inside her. It was more than just admiration, it was a desire to prove herself, to be stronger, to be seen. "I trust you," she whispered. Naruto smirked, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Good. Now, let's begin." The days passed, and Naruto's influence over Hinata grew. He didn't just train her in the physical aspects of being a shinobi. No, he focused on her mental state, pushing her to shed her insecurities and embrace her true power. He was harsh, sometimes even cruel, but it was a lesson she needed to learn. If she wanted to be strong, she couldn't afford to be weak in any part of her being, body, mind, or spirit. As the Chunin exams approached, Naruto's attention shifted to other potential candidates for his growing harem. Temari, the proud and strong-willed kunoichi from the Sand Village, had caught his eye. There was something about her, something fierce, untamed, that intrigued him. He could see the hunger for power in her, the desire to prove herself, just as he had once had. During the first round of the Chunin exams, Naruto couldn't help but notice the way Temari looked at him. It wasn't just curiosity, it was fascination. She watched him with a mix of intrigue and admiration, recognizing the raw power he exuded. She didn't fear him, as many others did. Instead, she seemed to respect it. Their first real interaction came during a break in the exams. Temari approached him, her expression serious, her posture confident. "You're different," she said, her voice carrying a slight edge of both challenge and interest. "I've seen a lot of shinobi, but you're not like them." Naruto met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "I'm not like them because I don't play by their rules," he replied coldly, his words carrying weight. "And that's why I'm going to be the strongest." Temari's lips curled into a small smile, as if she were intrigued by his boldness. "You think you can beat everyone? Do you really believe you're above them all?" Naruto's eyes burned with an intensity that made her shiver. "I don't think. I know." Temari laughed softly, the sound rich with admiration and amusement. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." And just like that, Naruto could see the shift. She was intrigued by him, yes, but there was something more beneath the surface. Temari, like him, was driven by ambition and a desire for strength. She wasn't just interested in him as a potential rival, she was interested in what he could offer her. The seed had been planted. Back in Konoha, Naruto's influence over Sakura and Ino was growing as well. They were both drawn to him, though for different reasons. Sakura, ever the emotional one, was captivated by his strength, by the way he carried himself with such confidence and power. She had always been drawn to strong men, and Naruto's presence seemed to command her attention. Ino, on the other hand, saw something in Naruto that she couldn't ignore, an air of control, a power that radiated from him like a magnetic force. She had always prided herself on being the one in control, the one who held sway over others, but with Naruto, she felt a strange sense of submission. It was a feeling she didn't quite understand, but it only made her more curious. Naruto manipulated them both with ease, playing on their desires for attention, for validation, and for power. Sakura, desperate for Naruto's approval, often sought him out for advice, for training. She wanted to be by his side, to prove that she was worthy of his attention. Ino, always the strategist, saw the potential in Naruto not just as a leader, but as a way to further her own ambitions. Naruto offered them both a simple choice: follow him, and he would make them stronger. Betray him, and they would be crushed. Sakura, eager to prove herself, became more compliant, her admiration for him growing each day. Ino, ever the shrewd one, saw the opportunity to use Naruto as a stepping stone to her own goals, but the deeper she got, the more she realized that she was playing a dangerous game. There was no going back now. Naruto's harem was not something he built out of love. No, it was a tool, a means to an end. Each woman he drew to him was an asset, a pawn in his grand plan. He offered them strength, power, protection, things they all craved in one form or another. And in return, they gave him loyalty. They became his followers, his allies, his tools. But as he continued to manipulate and seduce, to bend those around him to his will, he couldn't help but feel a small flicker of something deeper, something more human. The bond he shared with Hinata was more than just a master-servant relationship. There was a connection there, something that went beyond the power he offered her. And though he would never admit it, the pull he felt toward her was something he hadn't anticipated. In the end, it didn't matter. He was building his empire, one follower at a time. And with each woman who joined his side, each one who submitted to his will, his power grew. They would serve him, love him, and most importantly, they would make him stronger. The harem was only the beginning. The Chunin exams had begun. The tension in the air was palpable as candidates from all over the land gathered for one of the most grueling tests of their abilities. The streets of Konoha were filled with the hustle and bustle of competitors, but it was clear that Naruto's presence overshadowed everyone else. His reputation had grown rapidly. Whispers of his terrifying abilities were spreading like wildfire, striking fear into the hearts of even the most seasoned shinobi. Naruto stood at the entrance to the forest of death, his cold, calculating eyes scanning the area ahead. He had no fear of what was to come. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, with power that none could match. His mind was focused on the battles ahead, on the manipulation of those around him, and on the rise to absolute dominance. There was no room for failure. The first round of the Chunin exams had been relatively uneventful, with Naruto breezing through the written test and easily defeating his opponents in the preliminary rounds. But now, the real test was about to begin. The forest of death. A place where only the strong survived, where the weak were weeded out, and where survival meant not just physical strength, but cunning and ruthlessness. As Naruto and his teammates entered the dense forest, the sense of danger was thick in the air. His teammates, Sakura and Sasuke, followed behind him, both uneasy at the gravity of what was to come. Naruto's presence, however, was unwavering. He had no fear, nothing to fear. The true test, as he saw it, was not about surviving the forest. It was about making everyone around him see the truth, that he was the one who was destined to rule. The initial hours were quiet, too quiet. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves filled the air, but there was a sense of foreboding lurking just beneath the surface. Naruto's eyes darted from tree to tree, aware that dangers could come from any direction. He could feel the presence of other teams that were likely watching, waiting, calculating their next move. But there was one presence that stood out from the rest, one that Naruto felt even before he saw him. Orochimaru. The snake-like shinobi had been lurking in the shadows, his sinister intentions clear from the start. Naruto wasn't surprised. Orochimaru had always sought power, always sought to manipulate others for his own gain. But Naruto wasn't like the others. He didn't seek power for the sake of it, he sought it because it was his birthright. The sooner Orochimaru learned that, the better. It didn't take long before Orochimaru made his move. Sasuke, naive and driven by his own hatred for his brother, had been marked with the curse mark. It was a subtle but effective move, one that would slowly corrupt Sasuke from the inside out. But as Orochimaru made his approach, Naruto wasn't about to let the snake get away with it. With a flash of movement, Naruto was upon Orochimaru, his blade drawn in an instant. His speed was inhuman, his precision unmatched. Orochimaru's eyes widened in surprise as Naruto's crescent-shaped slash cut through the air, aimed directly at his throat. The sheer force of the strike forced Orochimaru to dodge, but not before the edge of the blade grazed his skin, leaving a deep gash. "You think you can touch him?" Naruto's voice was cold, his tone a stark contrast to the calmness he exuded. He stood over Orochimaru, his blade poised for another strike. "Sasuke is mine to manipulate, not yours." Orochimaru hissed, his face twisted in rage and frustration. The curse seal on Sasuke's neck began to pulse, but Naruto didn't back down. He stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity, his body surrounded by an aura of power that radiated from his every pore. This was the power of Kokushibo, the power of moon breathing, the power of a demon who had transcended human limitations. Before Orochimaru could respond, Naruto launched another crescent-shaped slash, cutting through the air with incredible speed. The force of the attack sent Orochimaru tumbling backward, his form dissipating into a cloud of smoke as he retreated. It wasn't a full retreat. Orochimaru never gave up so easily, but for now, he had been forced to acknowledge Naruto's overwhelming power. Naruto stood tall, watching as Orochimaru vanished into the distance. He didn't need to chase him. Orochimaru was a threat, yes, but he was also a pawn. In time, Naruto would use him, manipulate him into doing what he wanted. But for now, his focus had to remain on the exams, on his rise to power. As the battle subsided, Sasuke stood trembling, his hand clutching his neck where the curse mark had been placed. His eyes burned with a mixture of pain and anger, and yet, there was a glimmer of something else, something darker. Naruto could see it in his eyes. Sasuke had tasted power, had felt the pull of something greater than himself. And now, he would be Naruto's whether he realized it or not. "You're weak," Naruto said coldly, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Don't let yourself be controlled by something as pathetic as that curse mark. You're mine now, Sasuke. And I won't let anyone take what's mine." Sasuke looked up at Naruto, his expression hardening, but there was no mistaking the subtle shift in his gaze. Sasuke was beginning to understand, just as Naruto had known he would. He was beginning to recognize the strength Naruto wielded, the unrelenting power that Naruto embodied. But there was something else in Sasuke's eyes as well, a spark of defiance. That spark would be extinguished in time, Naruto was sure of it. But for now, he had bigger things to deal with. Like Gaara. The Jinchuriki of the Sand Village had been an enigma from the moment he stepped into the exams. Gaara's power was undeniable. He was a force of nature, a destructive force that could obliterate everything in his path. But Gaara's greatest weakness was his madness, his instability. And that was something Naruto would exploit. The two finally clashed during the second round of the exams, in the heart of the Forest of Death. Gaara, his sand swirling around him like a violent storm, charged at Naruto with a deadly intent. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he moved with terrifying speed, his sand rising in a lethal wave. But Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't need to. With a single movement, Naruto activated his moon-breathing forms. His blade moved like a streak of silver, carving through the air with such precision and force that it left a trail of light in its wake. Gaara's sand rushed to intercept, but Naruto's strikes were too fast, too powerful. The sand was sliced through effortlessly, Gaara's defenses shattered in an instant. Gaara's expression twisted in confusion and frustration. He had never met someone who could so easily dismantle his power. His sand moved in a desperate attempt to protect him, but Naruto's crescent-shaped slashes tore through it like paper, cutting through the air with ease. "Is this the best you can do?" Naruto asked, his voice a cold sneer as he watched Gaara struggle. Pathetic. In that moment, Naruto unleashed his true power. With the final, devastating slash, Gaara's sand was completely obliterated, and the Jinchuriki himself was sent sprawling to the ground, his body bleeding and broken. It was a humiliating defeat, one that Gaara would never forget. Temari, Gaara's older sister, watched from the sidelines, her eyes widening in both awe and fear. She had always known that Naruto was strong, but seeing him in action, watching him dismantle Gaara so effortlessly, had a profound effect on her. There was something captivating about his strength, something raw and untamed that made her feel both admiration and a strange pull. Temari's thoughts were interrupted as she felt the weight of Naruto's gaze on her. He had noticed her just as he had noticed everyone else in the arena. His cold eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, she felt like she was the only one in the world. She wasn't afraid of him, not in the way most people were. No, she was intrigued by him, fascinated by the power he wielded and the way he moved through the world with such dominance. Naruto smirked, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of his lips. Temari's admiration hadn't gone unnoticed. She would be useful to him, just like the others. As the Chunin exams continued, the chaos only grew. Naruto's influence was spreading, his power growing with each passing moment. He had shattered Gaara's ego and established himself as the true force to be reckoned with in the exams. The others, including Hinata, watched in awe and fear as he continued to dominate, his power undeniable. Hinata, more than anyone, saw the true depth of Naruto's strength. She had always known him as the boy who had been cast aside, the one who fought alone. But now, she saw him for what he truly was, a force of nature, a demon that could not be stopped. Her admiration for him grew with each battle, and her loyalty deepened. She had seen his true power, and she had made a choice. She would follow him, serve him, and never look back. Naruto's rise had only just begun, and the Chunin exams had become the stage for his ultimate domination. With every battle, with every move, he carved the path toward his destiny, one that would leave the world trembling in his wake. The sun hung low over the Hidden Leaf Village, casting long shadows across its streets and buildings. But for Naruto, the village felt smaller by the day. The echoes of his battles resonated in his mind, reminding him that he was not just a boy anymore, he was becoming a force that could not be ignored. The villagers had begun to see him in a different light. Whispers followed him wherever he went, not of hatred or fear, but of awe and respect. His name was no longer just tied to the Nine Tails or his status as a pariah. It was associated with power, with control over not just his own destiny, but the destiny of the entire village. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he stood atop a tall building, looking out over the village he had been born in. He had no illusions about Konoha. It was corrupt, riddled with bureaucracy and power struggles, all of which contributed to the suffering of its people. The village had once rejected him, and now, it was his turn to take control. He would rid it of the rot that festered beneath the surface. His first move was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye. He began targeting the corrupt officials within Konoha's inner circle, those who used their positions for personal gain, those who disregarded the true needs of the village. Using his influence and the fear he had garnered through his strength, Naruto manipulated situations, exploiting the flaws in their power structures. One by one, these officials were removed, either through public disgrace or more permanent means. The village leaders and elders were too caught up in their own schemes to notice the pattern, too preoccupied with their own agendas to realize that their power was slowly slipping away. The ones who could be bribed were, and those who were too dangerous to leave alive were quietly dealt with. But Naruto wasn't just eliminating threats. He was also building a network of allies hidden behind layers of influence, deception, and subtle manipulation. The villagers who once saw him as nothing more than the demon child, the outsider, were now beginning to view him differently. Some of them began to understand what he was truly capable of. And some, like the younger generation, felt a sense of reverence and awe toward him. They were drawn to him not only for his power but for the way he moved through the world, unshackled by the constraints that bound others. Naruto's true power, however, wasn't just in his ability to dominate others physically. It lay in his ability to manipulate the very fabric of the world around him, bending people's wills to his own. The more he learned, the more he understood that power was not something to be taken by force alone. It was something to be cultivated, nurtured, and used to control everything and everyone. But power was not only in politics or strength. It was also in knowledge that Naruto had sought out with a voracious appetite. He had come across forbidden techniques, ones that were buried deep within Konoha's libraries, hidden away by those who feared the consequences of unlocking them. Naruto had no such fear. His power was already immense, but now, with each forbidden jutsu he absorbed into his being, he grew stronger. These techniques, often dark and forbidden for good reason, amplified his abilities to terrifying heights. Each new jutsu he mastered added another layer of invincibility to his ever-growing arsenal. It was one evening, as he stood in the quiet darkness of his private training grounds, that he felt the pulse of his power surging. His body crackled with energy as new techniques flowed through him, each one more dangerous than the last. He could feel the weight of them, the knowledge of them, sinking into his bones. And yet, it was not enough. It would never be enough. Power, once tasted, was a hunger that could not be satisfied. The air was thick with anticipation as Naruto let the power simmer within him. He was no longer just the boy who had been abandoned. He was something far greater, something far darker. And soon, the entire world would know it. Hinata had been watching him for weeks now. At first, she had admired him from afar, unsure of what to make of the changes she saw in him. But as time passed, her feelings for him deepened. She had always believed in his potential, always known that there was more to him than the village had seen. But now, seeing him become a figure of such overwhelming power, she found herself both awestruck and terrified. Hinata had always been quiet, reserved, but she was no stranger to the pain of being overlooked. She had lived in the shadow of her own family, of her father's cold expectations. But Naruto had made her feel seen. He had been the one person who had never treated her as weak or insignificant. And now, as she watched him, she realized that her feelings for him went beyond admiration. It was love. A love that had bloomed silently, quietly, in the corners of her heart. The moment came when Hinata could no longer hold back. She found him alone, as he often was after training, his eyes closed in contemplation, his presence more commanding than ever. It was in these quiet moments that he seemed most untouchable, as if the weight of the world had been placed upon his shoulders. Hinata. Naruto's voice broke the silence as he noticed her standing there, the faintest hint of surprise in his tone. Hinata's heart raced. This was it. She had to speak now, or she would never be able to live with herself. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling at her sides. Naruto, her voice faltered, but she pressed on. I don't know how to say this, but I want to be with you. I want to support you, follow you. I believe in you, more than anyone else ever has. Naruto watched her, his expression unreadable. But there was a flicker in his eyes, something that softened the harshness of his usual demeanor. He had always known that Hinata was different from the others, that she saw something in him that no one else did. But to hear her say it, his heart, if it could still be called that, stirred slightly. You've already supported me, Hinata, Naruto said, his voice low, almost gentle. But if you truly want to follow me, if you want to be by my side, then you must understand that it won't be easy. You will have to trust me completely. Hinata nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I trust you, Naruto. I've always trusted you. With that, Naruto stepped forward, reaching out to take her hand. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. In that moment, she knew that her place was beside him, no matter what the cost. And Naruto knew that he had found someone who would stand by him, someone who was not afraid to follow him into the darkness. From that moment on, Hinata became the first to officially join his harem. It wasn't something she had ever imagined, nor was it something Naruto had intended. But it was inevitable. In the world they lived in, power was the ultimate currency. And the women who followed him would be rewarded with it. But this was only the beginning. As Naruto's influence continued to grow, so too did his reach among the younger generation of Konoha. They began to look at him not with fear, but with reverence, seeing him as a leader, a force to be reckoned with. Some saw in him the potential for greatness, others saw him as the one who could finally give them the power they had always craved. Naruto's network expanded, slowly but surely. His influence was undeniable. And with every passing day, his vision for the future grew clearer. Konoha would be his. The entire shinobi world would kneel before him. He would reshape the world in his image, with no one left to stand in his way. But for now, he had to play the long game, make alliances, eliminate enemies, and continue building his strength. Each move, each step, was carefully calculated. And in the quiet of the night, as he looked over his village from the shadows, Naruto knew that he was closer than ever to his ultimate goal. The air was thick with tension in Konoha. Hidden beneath the calm surface of the village's daily activities, something darker was stirring. The whispers had been growing louder, rumors of a betrayal that would shake the village to its very core. It wasn't just any ordinary betrayal. This one was from within. Orochimaru, one of the village's most trusted and dangerous ninja, had been plotting for years to undermine Konoha's power. His ambitions had been kept secret for so long, hidden behind a veil of loyalty. But now, the time had come. Orochimaru was about to strike. Naruto stood at the edge of the village, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had long suspected Orochimaru's true intentions, the man's lust for power was undeniable. But Naruto wasn't foolish enough to simply wait for Orochimaru to make his move. He had already been making his own preparations, setting the stage for his own rise. He had been watching Orochimaru for some time, studying his patterns, understanding his desires, and learning his weaknesses. The snake's obsession with immortality was something Naruto could use to his advantage. As a master of manipulation, he knew that all he had to do was wait for Orochimaru to make a mistake. And that mistake had come. The day arrived when Orochimaru finally made his move, attacking Konoha in a bid to take control of the village. He had planned to strike during the chaos, using his influence over the Sound Village to tear the village apart from within. His plans, however, were far too predictable for Naruto. The moment Orochimaru moved, Naruto set his own plans into motion. He moved swiftly, silently, as a shadow among shadows. No one suspected that the boy they had once feared, the boy who had once been the pariah of the village, was the one pulling the strings. Naruto knew that Orochimaru's attack would be a failure. His move would come not in direct confrontation, but through subtlety, through control of the pieces on the board. The battle between Orochimaru and Konoha's forces was fierce, But Naruto did not engage directly. He had a greater purpose. From the shadows, he moved unnoticed, manipulating the battlefield with ease. His presence was a force in itself, and he used the fear he had cultivated to his advantage. He knew that once Orochimaru's betrayal was exposed, the village would be thrown into chaos, and that was exactly what he needed. As Orochimaru and his forces clashed with Konoha's ninjas, Naruto stood back and watched the destruction unfold. His allies, hidden deep within the village, were already positioned to disrupt Orochimaru's plans. The snake's attack would fail, but Naruto's plan had just begun. It was during the height of the battle, as Orochimaru prepared to unleash his final attack, that Naruto made his move. The moment came quickly, like the strike of a viper. Naruto appeared before Orochimaru, standing tall with a calm that unsettled even the most experienced shinobi on the battlefield. Orochimaru turned to face him, his eyes narrowing with a mix of curiosity and disdain. He had always seen Naruto as nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. But there was something in the boy's eyes now, something dangerous and sharp, something Orochimaru had not anticipated. The boy had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. "You think you can stop me?" Orochimaru hissed, his snake-like voice filled with venom. "You, who are nothing more than a shadow of a former village." Naruto's expression remained cold and unreadable. "I'm not here to stop you, Orochimaru," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "I'm here to take what's mine." Before Orochimaru could react, Naruto was upon him. The air seemed to warp as he moved, the shadows around him stretching and twisting with unnatural speed. Naruto drew his blade, the ancient sword that had been a constant companion to him in his rise to power. The blade shimmered in the dim light, reflecting the faint glow of the moon. In one fluid motion, Naruto slashed through the air. Orochimaru, always quick and deadly, tried to dodge, but he was too slow. The crescent-shaped arc of Naruto's attack landed squarely across his chest, cutting through his defenses with ease. The force of the blow sent Orochimaru staggering back, blood splattering across the ground. Orochimaru's eyes widened in shock. He had underestimated Naruto. No one could move like that, no one could fight with such precision. This wasn't the boy he had once tried to control, this was something else entirely. "You've become something else," Orochimaru hissed, his voice tinged with both awe and fear. "But you're still just a child, Naruto. You can't control this power." Naruto stepped forward, his presence towering over the injured Orochimaru. "You're wrong," he said, his voice dark and filled with promise. "I don't need to control this power. It's already mine." With a final, swift motion, Naruto drove his sword deep into Orochimaru's heart. The man's eyes widened in surprise, his body twitching violently before going still. The once proud and cunning ninja collapsed to the ground, his blood pooling beneath him. The battle around them stopped for a moment, as the surviving shinobi processed what had just happened. The legendary Orochimaru, the one who had betrayed Konoha time and time again, was dead at the hands of a boy they had once disregarded. But Naruto wasn't done. He had orchestrated this. He had always known that Orochimaru would fall, but now, it was time for the real work to begin. The villagers, his allies, and even his enemies would now see just how far he had come. With Orochimaru's death, Naruto's position was solidified. Anko, who had been Orochimaru's former pupil, stood off to the side, her eyes wide in disbelief. She had always known that Naruto was different, but she had never seen this level of power before. And yet, as she watched him stand over the fallen snake, something else stirred within her, a mixture of admiration and something darker. She approached him cautiously, her eyes locked on his. "You killed him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Naruto turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Orochimaru was weak," he said simply. "And now, I'm stronger." Anko hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, her gaze intense. "You're different," Naruto. You're not the same boy you once were. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in her tone, something that spoke to a deeper understanding, a recognition of the power he wielded. Naruto smirked slightly. I've always been different, Anko. It just took me some time to realize it. Without warning, Anko dropped to one knee, her head bowed in respect. Then allow me to serve you. I have no place with Konoha anymore, but I would follow you. I would serve you with everything I have. Naruto regarded her with a quiet intensity. She was the first to make such an offer, and something about the way she presented herself intrigued him. She had been a tool of Orochimaru once, but now she was ready to serve him. This was how he would build his power, through loyalty, through those who recognized his strength and bowed to it. Rise, Anko, he said, his voice soft but firm. You will have your place by my side. And so, in the wake of Orochimaru's death, Naruto's power only grew. With Anko's loyalty now secured, he began to build his influence even further. His harem, his network, and his reputation expanded, each move making him more formidable than ever before. It was not just the death of Orochimaru that marked a turning point. It was the beginning of something far darker, far more powerful. As Naruto stood over the body of his enemy, something shifted within him, a brief transformation, a glimpse of his true demonic form. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and for a moment, the air around him crackled with dark energy. It was a terrifying sight, one that sent chills through the air. Even the most seasoned shinobi who had witnessed it knew that Naruto was no longer just a boy. He was something much more. The world would soon learn that the shadow of Konoha was no longer a mere boy. It was a demon in human form. And nothing would stop him from taking everything he desired. Naruto's rise had been swift, his power undeniable, and now, his ambition was pushing him towards something far more dangerous. He had grown tired of the masquerade, tired of hiding in the shadows, manipulating others from afar. It was time for Konoha to see him for what he truly was, the future ruler of the world, the true king of the shinobi, and the one destined to reshape the village in his image. His first move was to challenge the Hokage himself, the symbol of Konoha's power and leadership. But Naruto wasn't interested in petty battles of strength or tactics. He had no need for such things. His battle was one of dominance, of claiming Konoha as his own and tearing down its corrupt structure. He knew that it would not be easy. The village was full of loyalists to the Hokage, and Tsunade, who had recently returned to Konoha after her time away, would undoubtedly stand in his way. But he was not the same boy who had been neglected and forgotten. He had grown beyond anything they could imagine. He would break Konoha's resistance piece by piece. The day of the challenge came when the village was on edge. Rumors of Naruto's growing power had begun to circulate, whispers of his inhuman speed, his ability to manipulate the battlefield with ease, and his fearsome new abilities that had taken even his enemies by surprise. The villagers, once indifferent to his presence, now watched him with a mix of fear and awe. Naruto stood before the Hokage's mansion, his expression calm, unreadable. His black cloak billowed behind him, and his presence alone seemed to darken the skies above. The people of Konoha gathered in hushed silence, unsure of what to expect. Their village, the one they had always trusted to protect them, was about to face a challenge unlike any they had seen before. With a single step forward, Naruto made his declaration. His voice rang out across the village, calm and full of authority, as if he were speaking to the heavens themselves. I, Naruto Uzumaki, challenge the Hokage, he proclaimed. I will reform Konoha, reshape it in my image. The old ways have failed, and I am the one who will bring true peace to this village. Under my rule, Konoha will be stronger than it has ever been. His words were bold, and they reverberated through the village like a thunderclap. The civilians, unsure of how to react, exchanged nervous glances. But the shinobi, the warriors who had lived and died for this village, narrowed their eyes. They knew that a challenge to the Hokage was not something to be taken lightly. It was an open declaration of war. Inside the Hokage's office, Tsunade sat at her desk, her face tense as she looked over the report in her hands. The village was on edge, and news of Naruto's challenge had reached her ears. She knew that Naruto had grown powerful, but this was unprecedented. She had fought alongside him during his early days as a shinobi, and she had seen the potential within him. But now, this potential had turned into something dangerous. The boy she had once considered a brat had become a force to be reckoned with. Without hesitation, Tsunade stood up from her desk and walked to the window, her gaze fixed on the village below. She could feel the weight of Naruto's words pressing down on her. She knew that if she did not act, if she did not put an end to this madness, everything she had worked for would crumble. But there was a part of her that could not deny the truth in his words. Konoha's structure was flawed. Its leaders were corrupt, its streets littered with betrayal, lies, and incompetence. Was Naruto right? Could he be the one to bring about the change the village desperately needed? The decision weighed heavily on her mind, but there was no time to waste. She had to face him. Tsunade made her way to the front of the Hokage's mansion, where Naruto stood, waiting. As she approached, she felt a chill in the air, an overwhelming sense of power radiating from him. She had always been strong, always been a force to be reckoned with, but standing before Naruto now, she felt small. "Why, Naruto?" Tsunade asked, her voice steady but filled with a hint of uncertainty. "Why do you want to take over Konoha? You've always had potential, but this is madness." Naruto's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, it was as if the world itself had stopped. His gaze was cold, calculating, and yet, there was something deeper in his eyes, a hunger for something more, a desire to break free from the chains of his past. "The village has failed," Naruto replied, his voice unwavering. "The people here, the leaders, they are all trapped in a cycle of weakness and complacency. You, Tsunade, are no different. You can't protect this village from itself. You can't stop the rot that runs deep within its heart. But I can. I will be the one to shape this village into something stronger, something greater." Tsunade's fists clenched at her sides. She had seen the depths of Naruto's power, but this was a declaration of war against everything she had fought for. Yet, as much as she wanted to deny it, a part of her understood. Naruto was right. Konoha had become stagnant, its leaders corrupt, its system flawed. She had tried to fix it, but there was no real change. Maybe Naruto was the one who could bring about the change they needed. But was she willing to accept it? "You're wrong," Tsunade said, her voice firm. "This village may be imperfect, but it's ours. We protect it, we fight for it. I won't let you destroy everything we built." Naruto's lips curled into a faint smile, a smile that held no warmth. "Then I suppose we have no choice but to fight, Hokage." Before Tsunade could react, Naruto's chakra flared to life, a surge of dark energy that seemed to bend the very air around him. The earth beneath his feet cracked and splintered as the energy gathered, and in an instant, his demonic power was unleashed. The energy radiated from him in waves, distorting the space around him, creating a heavy pressure that pushed against Tsunade's chest. Tsunade steadied herself, summoning her own chakra to counter the force. She knew this would not be an easy fight. The Naruto she had once known had become something else entirely, a force beyond her comprehension. But she was still the Hokage, and she would defend Konoha with her life. Their battle raged across the village, the sound of their clash echoing through the streets. Naruto's power was overwhelming, his strikes faster than the eye could follow, his movements fluid and precise. Tsunade, skilled as she was, struggled to keep up with his speed and strength. Every blow from him sent shockwaves through the air, and each time her fist connected with him, it felt as though she was striking stone. But Naruto wasn't just relying on brute strength. He had unlocked something more, something darker. He had gained access to the ancient scrolls that had been hidden deep within Konoha's archives, ancient texts that contained forbidden techniques and knowledge of the past. And now, with that knowledge at his disposal, he was unstoppable. His movements had become even more precise, his control over his chakra flawless. With every strike, with every breath, he was becoming something more, something akin to the very demons of old. And yet, despite his overwhelming power, Naruto did not wish to destroy Tsunade. Not yet. There was something he saw in her, something that intrigued him. She had the strength to resist, to fight, to stand up against him. Perhaps she was more than just an obstacle. Perhaps she could be an ally. As the battle reached its peak, Naruto paused. His chakra still hummed in the air, but he no longer attacked. He stood tall, watching Tsunade carefully. "You're strong," he said quietly. "Stronger than I gave you credit for. But you're not strong enough to stop me. You never were." Tsunade glared at him, her breath heavy, her body battered. "And yet, here I am, still standing." Naruto smiled, the faintest hint of admiration in his eyes. "Then let me show you a better way." Before Tsunade could respond, Naruto closed the distance between them, his hand reaching out to touch her wounded arm. He channeled his demonic energy through her, his chakra flowing into her body. For a moment, Tsunade felt the sharp sting of pain as the energy coursed through her, but then something incredible happened. The wounds that had been inflicted on her during their battle began to heal, the pain easing away. Her strength began to return, and she could feel the energy pulsing through her in a way she had never felt before. Naruto pulled back, his gaze never leaving her. "I can heal you, Tsunade. I can make you stronger than you've ever been. All I ask is that you join me. Konoha needs change, and I am the one who can bring it." Tsunade stared at him, her mind racing. She knew that what he offered was powerful, but was it worth the price? Could she really accept a world ruled by someone like Naruto? Someone so consumed by power and ambition? But there was another part of her that couldn't deny the truth. Naruto's power was undeniable. He had already begun to change Konoha, and if she fought against him, she would only stand in the way of progress. Perhaps it was time for a new era. A time where strength, not tradition, ruled. Tsunade took a deep breath, her decision made. "Fine," she said quietly. "I will follow you, Naruto. But know this, I will not be your puppet. If you betray this village, if you turn your back on the people you swore to protect, I will stop you. No matter what." Naruto nodded, a smirk playing on his lips. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Hokage." And with that, the two of them stood together, their alliance sealed in blood and power. The future of Konoha was no longer uncertain, it was in their hands now. Together, they would reshape the village, and the world would soon know the rise of the Moon King. The moon hung high over Konoha, casting an ethereal glow on the village below. But it was not just the village that was illuminated. The darkness that Naruto Uzumaki had ushered into the world seemed to grow with each passing day. His ambitions had shifted from mere dominance of Konoha to something grander, something more devastating. He sought not only to remake his village but to bring the entire shinobi world under his control. His vision of a new world was one where only the strong would survive, where power was the ultimate currency, and where those who opposed him would fall like autumn leaves before a storm. Naruto's grip over Konoha had solidified. His power was undeniable, and even Tsunade, who had once fought to protect the village, had bent the knee to him. She had seen what he could do, what he was capable of, and recognized that Konoha's survival lay in aligning with him, at least for the time being. His newfound strength, tempered by the ancient techniques he had unlocked, was far beyond that of any ordinary shinobi. But it wasn't just Tsunade who had joined his cause. Tenten, the weapons master, and Kurane, the genjutsu expert, had also pledged their loyalty to him. Both women had watched Naruto rise with awe, their admiration growing with each of his battles, each display of his newfound strength. He was no longer the boy who had been laughed at by the villagers. He had become a symbol of overwhelming power, a force that none could ignore. And for Tenten and Kurane, the choice to follow him was easy. Tenten had always believed in the strength of her weapons, but she saw something different in Naruto's power, something that transcended mere tools. She saw a king, a leader who could not only command but who could also inspire loyalty through sheer presence. Kurane, on the other hand, had long since grown disillusioned with the village's politics. The betrayal of the elders, the endless manipulation, and the lack of true vision had soured her. But with Naruto, she saw a leader who understood the value of strength and who was not afraid to break the rules to achieve his goals. His ability to control and manipulate chakra with a precision that even the best of Konoha's shinobi could not match intrigued her. Together, they formed a powerful trio, each contributing their unique skills to Naruto's growing empire. But Naruto had much grander plans than simply conquering Konoha. The entire shinobi world would be his. And it would start with a declaration of war that would shake the foundations of the world. It was in the dead of night that Naruto issued his first ultimatum. The message was simple and unyielding, delivered through the networks of his spies who had infiltrated every major village. Bow before the Moon King or face annihilation. His declaration was not one of negotiation, but of domination. The Leaf Village's power had grown tenfold since Naruto's rise, and now, he wanted the world to know it. His first target was the Hidden Sand. Gaara, now the Kazekage, had been a potential ally, one of the few people who could understand the pain of loneliness, the thirst for power, but Naruto's goals had gone beyond mere alliances. He didn't want friends, he wanted followers. Those who stood in his way would be crushed, and those who swore fealty would be rewarded. Tenten, Kurane, and Naruto, leading a force of elite shinobi, traveled to the Hidden Sand under the cover of darkness. The desert landscape stretched before them, the sand shifting beneath their feet as they approached the village gates. Word of their arrival had already reached Gaara's ears, and he stood at the village's border, awaiting the inevitable clash. Naruto didn't speak as he approached Gaara. His eyes burned with a cold intensity as he stared down at the man who had once been his peer. Gaara, for all his power, had always been a lone wolf, just like Naruto had been. But now, they stood on opposite sides of an unforgiving divide. You came to offer an alliance. Gaara's voice was low, filled with a barely contained rage. I don't bow to anyone, least of all you. Naruto's expression remained calm, unbothered by Gaara's challenge. You can either stand with me, or you can stand against me, he said. Either way, your fate will be the same. You are weak, Gaara. You've been pretending to rule for far too long. Gaara's chakra surged, his sand swirling around him like a storm. But Naruto was already a step ahead. With a flick of his wrist, he activated moon breathing, his demonic power flaring to life. The energy rippled through the air, distorting the space around him as he moved like a blur. He wasn't interested in a prolonged fight. Gaara was no longer a challenge, not with the power that he now wielded. Naruto's speed was beyond anything Gaara had ever encountered. He was a monster, a demonic force that moved faster than the eye could see. Gaara tried to retaliate with his sand, but it was futile. Naruto's blade sliced through the air, cutting through Gaara's defenses like paper. He moved with a fluidity that seemed to bend the very essence of the world around him. His form shimmered like a shadow, too fast, too powerful for Gaara to counter. Within moments, Naruto stood before Gaara, his blade at the Kazekige's throat. I gave you a choice, Gaara, Naruto said softly, his voice carrying a deadly edge. But you've made the wrong one. With a single motion, Naruto's blade slashed through the air, the sound of the strike reverberating across the battlefield. Gaara fell to the ground, his body crumpling as his sand shield faltered. His chakra flickered out, and his sand turned to dust. Tendon and Kurane watched from the sidelines, their expressions a mix of awe and admiration. They had seen Naruto fight before, but never with such brutality, never with such cold precision. He was a force of nature, a being who could not be stopped. Let this be a lesson to the rest of the world, Naruto declared to his allies. Those who defy me will be crushed without mercy. Word of Gaara's defeat spread like wildfire, and soon, the rest of the shinobi world took notice. Naruto's power had grown exponentially, and now the time had come to wage war against the remaining villages. The hidden mist, the hidden cloud, and the hidden stone would all be forced to bend a knee or suffer the consequences. But not everyone was ready to submit. Sasuke, the last remaining member of Team 7, was one of those who refused to yield. The jealousy that had long simmered within him flared to life upon hearing of Naruto's rise. Sasuke had always seen himself as the strongest, the one who would surpass everyone. But now, Naruto had surpassed him in every way imaginable. Sasuke's pride would not allow him to simply kneel before Naruto's power. His hatred, his need for vengeance, pushed him to take drastic action. In secret, Sasuke contacted the remnants of Orochimaru's forces, those who had escaped the clutches of the Hokage's forces. He formed an alliance with them, knowing that together, they could challenge Naruto's dominance. The Snake Sage had once been a powerful adversary, and even though he was gone, his influence lingered in the shadows. Sasuke trained relentlessly, pushing himself beyond his limits, determined to become strong enough to defeat Naruto and prove that he was the true heir to the Uchiha legacy. But Naruto was not a fool. He knew that Sasuke's jealousy and pride would lead him down this path. And when the inevitable confrontation came, it would be a battle for supremacy, one that would determine the future of the shinobi world. Naruto had already begun to gather allies from across the world, his influence spreading like wildfire. His power was now absolute, and anyone who stood in his way would be crushed without hesitation. As the war against the remaining villages loomed on the horizon, Naruto knew that the time for mercy had passed. This war would reshape the world, and only the strongest would survive. The land trembled as the confrontation between Naruto and Sasuke unfolded. The ground cracked beneath their feet, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The world seemed to hold its breath, knowing that this battle would determine the fate of the shinobi world. Naruto, the Moon King, and Sasuke, the last of the Uchiha, stood face to face in a desolate, windswept field just beyond Konoha's borders. Sasuke's eyes were narrowed in intense focus, the familiar fire of hatred burning in his Sharingan. His body was coursing with the power of the curse mark, its dark chakra wrapping around him like a serpentine coil, transforming him into something far beyond human. He had spent countless hours honing this power, driven by the need to surpass Naruto. The mere thought of submitting to him was unbearable. He had to win. He must defeat Naruto to prove his worth, to reclaim what he believed was his destiny. Naruto, Sasuke spat, his voice tinged with bitterness, you think you've become a god, but you're just a fool. Power means nothing if it corrupts you. I'll show you that there's still something I can take from you. Naruto's expression was calm, unbothered. He had anticipated this moment, knowing that Sasuke's pride and jealousy would eventually lead him here. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. Naruto was no longer the boy who had once sought recognition. He had become something more, a being with the power of Kokushibo coursing through his veins, an entity beyond mortal comprehension. You can keep pretending that you're stronger than me, Sasuke, Naruto said, his voice cold and piercing. But in the end, you'll see just how far I've surpassed you. With a flash, Sasuke moved, his speed augmented by the curse mark. He slashed through the air with the full power of his Chidori, aiming directly for Naruto's chest. But Naruto was faster. His form blurred, his demonic power allowing him to move with a fluidity that defied logic. He dodged Sasuke's attack effortlessly, his eyes glowing with an eerie crimson light as he read Sasuke's every movement before it even happened. Is that all you've got, Sasuke? Naruto taunted, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. You're still fighting like you're trying to prove something to me. But I'm not interested in your petty struggles. You're already too far gone. Sasuke roared, his chakra flaring as the curse mark took full control. His body expanded, growing larger, more monstrous as he tapped into the forbidden power that Orochimaru had once bestowed upon him. His skin darkened, his eyes flashing with a blood-red intensity, his body pulsating with power. He was a force of nature now, a demon in human form, driven by rage and the need to destroy. You think you can defeat me just like this? Sasuke hissed, his voice distorted by the power coursing through him. I am the last of the Uchiha. I will destroy you, Naruto. Naruto's eyes gleamed with a mixture of contempt and amusement. You've already lost, Sasuke. You've been lost for a long time. The battle raged on, each strike between the two titans sending shock waves through the air. Sasuke's Chidori clashed against Naruto's moon breathing, their attacks creating violent explosions of chakra that lit up the night sky. Every blow was filled with raw, unrestrained power, the ground beneath them buckling and breaking as their clash reshaped the battlefield. Sasuke, using his curse mark's full power, became a blur of black energy, moving faster than the eye could track. But no matter how fast or powerful he became, Naruto was always one step ahead. His demonic power, amplified by Kokushibo's influence, gave him an uncanny ability to predict Sasuke's moves and counter them with lethal precision. With each exchange, Naruto's power only grew, his moon-breathing forms becoming more refined, more devastating. Sasuke's face twisted in frustration. Why won't you fall? He screamed, launching a barrage of lightning-fast strikes, each one aimed to tear Naruto apart. But Naruto's body moved like a phantom, slipping through the onslaught with ease. Because I've embraced the darkness, Sasuke, Naruto replied, his voice chilling. I've accepted the power of the demon moon, and now nothing can stop me. Sasuke's eyes burned with fury as he unleashed his final, most powerful technique. The Chidori, crackling with an intensity that threatened to shatter the very air, charged in his hand. This is it, Naruto. Prepare to die. But Naruto was ready. His body shifted, his form becoming a blur of darkness as he entered his Kokushibo state. The full force of his demonic power erupted from him in a surge of energy, a force that seemed to bend reality itself. The Chidori collided with his moon breathing, but the sheer power difference was insurmountable. Naruto's attack cut through Sasuke's with ease, the destructive force of his moon breathing splitting the air as it struck Sasuke with unrelenting force. Sasuke was sent flying back, his body crashing into the earth with a sickening thud. Blood seeped from his wounds, and the curse mark's energy began to dissipate, leaving him weakened and vulnerable. His breathing was labored, his vision blurred. He had given everything, pushed his body beyond its limits, and yet, he had failed. Naruto stood over him, his eyes glowing with a cold, merciless light. He didn't speak immediately, letting the silence hang between them like a heavy weight. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with disdain. You're not a god, Sasuke. You're just a child playing at power. Sasuke's head lifted slightly, his eyes full of defiance even as his body trembled from the intense pain. I won't submit to you, never. Naruto's gaze hardened. You've already submitted, Sasuke. You've lost. With a simple gesture, Naruto pressed his foot down onto Sasuke's chest, pinning him to the ground. His chakra flared, swirling around him like a storm, and the oppressive force of his power settled over Sasuke. It was a moment of submission, of complete domination. You can either submit to me now, or you can die, Naruto said, his voice carrying a finality that left no room for negotiation. Sasuke's pride, his unyielding will, seemed to clash with the reality of his defeat. For a moment, he was silent, contemplating his next move. The curse mark's power faded from his body, leaving him with nothing but the weight of his failure. Sasuke's pride had always been his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Naruto waited, watching him carefully. Then, with a defeated sigh, Sasuke lowered his head. "I submit," he whispered, the words heavy with bitterness. Naruto's eyes softened slightly, though the cruel edge of his power never wavered. "Good. You'll serve me now, Sasuke. You'll see that in this world, power is all that matters." As Sasuke lay there, broken and defeated, Naruto's victory was complete. He had not only destroyed his rival but had also secured his place as the unchallenged ruler of the shinobi world. The battle had been a brutal reminder that there was no one left to challenge him, no one who could stand against him. The moon would reign supreme, and with it, Naruto's domination of the shinobi world would begin in earnest. Sasuke's fall marked the end of an era of struggle, rivalry, and uncertainty. But for Naruto, it was only the beginning. The true battle for the shinobi world was about to start, and he was its undisputed king. Naruto stood at the top of the Hokage Tower, the view of Konoha sprawling before him. The once bustling streets were now quiet, his presence alone had subdued the land. Konoha was his, and so was the rest of the shinobi world. His rule was absolute, the result of countless battles, strategies, and manipulation. He had risen from a rejected child to a godlike force, and now, he would ensure that no one could ever challenge his reign. The power he had gained from Kokushibo, the demon moon, had transformed him into a being of unimaginable strength, a force of nature who bent the world to his will. With every passing day, his abilities grew. His understanding of moon breathing had deepened, his strikes now capable of cutting through mountains, and his demonic form had only further solidified his position as an unstoppable force. His harem, once a collection of women drawn to his power, had become the backbone of his empire. Hinata, the first to submit to him, stood at his side. Her devotion to him had deepened over time, her once timid nature now replaced with a fierce loyalty. Sakura, Ino, Temari, and even Tenten all had been molded by Naruto's influence, their loyalty a result of his manipulation, his promise of strength, and the protection he offered. Each of them had their role, their purpose in Naruto's world. They were no longer simple followers, they were his closest allies, trusted generals in his growing empire. With them by his side, Naruto's power extended beyond physical strength. His control over the hearts and minds of those around him was unparalleled. The world was his to command. The sound of footsteps echoed through the large hall of the Hokage Tower, drawing Naruto's attention. Hinata, her once soft features hardened by years of serving at his side, stepped forward, her eyes filled with admiration and devotion. "Master," she spoke softly, yet her voice carried a weight of command. "The Akatsuki have moved. They seek to challenge your rule." Naruto's lips curled into a smile, dark and full of malice. The Akatsuki, a group of rogue ninjas, had long been a thorn in the side of the shinobi world. They were powerful, but their power was no match for his own. They had no idea what they were up against. "Let them come," Naruto said, his voice dripping with confidence. "They will learn that no one can stand against me." Hinata bowed her head respectfully. "Shall I prepare the others, my lord?" Naruto looked out over the village one last time, his gaze cold and calculating. "Prepare them. We will make an example of the Akatsuki." The Akatsuki had gathered in the shadows, plotting their attack on the tyrant that had taken over the shinobi world. They were a group of formidable individuals, each with their own unique abilities and ambitions. At their helm was Pain, the leader, a man who had seen the pain of the world and sought to end it through absolute control. He had heard of Naruto's rise and seen the devastation he left in his wake. Now, he sought to challenge the Demon King. "We must strike now," Pain said, his voice resonating with authority. "Naruto's grip on the world is tightening. If we are to stop him, we must act before he becomes too powerful." The others nodded, each of them ready to take on the challenge. Sasori, Deidara, Haiden, and Kakozu, all of them had their own reasons for fighting. But the common goal was clear: Naruto had to be stopped. They moved quickly, their attack aimed at Konoha, with the intent of breaking Naruto's hold on the village. But what they didn't know was that Naruto was already waiting for them. The battle began at the village gates. Naruto stood at the front, his harem behind him, all of them ready for the slaughter that was about to unfold. Pain and the rest of the Akatsuki arrived, their powerful chakra signatures signaling their presence. They were confident, believing that they had the strength to take down the self-proclaimed king. Pain, his eyes glowing with the power of the Rinnegan, stepped forward, his voice carrying over the field. Naruto Uzumaki. You've come far, but this is where your reign ends. Naruto's eyes narrowed, his gaze cold and unfeeling. He stepped forward, his demonic energy surging around him. You really think you can defeat me, Pain? I am beyond your comprehension. Pain's expression hardened. We will see. With that, the battle erupted in full force. Pain launched his most powerful attacks, summoning the 6 paths of pain to assault Naruto's position. But it was all in vain. Naruto moved with inhuman speed, his moon-breathing techniques cutting through the paths with terrifying precision. Each strike sent shockwaves through the air, the power of his blows enough to cause the ground to crack and split. Deidara, with his clay creations, took to the skies, trying to bombard Naruto from above. But Naruto's demonic power allowed him to sense every movement, every explosion, and he dodged effortlessly. He unleashed his crescent-shaped slashes, cutting Deidara's clay birds to pieces midair. The explosion that followed was insignificant against Naruto's overwhelming strength. Sasori, with his puppets, launched an attack from behind, but Naruto's speed and strength were too much. His moon-breathing tore through the puppets, rendering them useless before they could even make contact with him. Haiden and Kakozu charged forward, their unique abilities designed to create havoc. But Naruto's demonic form, amplified by Kokushibo's power, allowed him to adapt to every attack, his body twisting and shifting with each move. With a simple motion, he decapitated Haiden, his head falling to the ground with a sickening thud. Kakozu attempted to strike from a distance, but Naruto's crescent slashes tore through his tendrils, severing them in an instant. Pain, witnessing his forces fall before Naruto's might, clenched his fists in anger. This cannot be happening, he shouted. Naruto approached Pain, his steps slow and deliberate. You were warned, he said, his voice echoing with dark power. You were all warned. Pain launched his final assault, the full power of the Rinnegan surging through him. His abilities, once the pinnacle of shinobi power, seemed insignificant against Naruto's demonic might. The ground cracked beneath their feet as they exchanged blows, but Naruto's strength outmatched Pain's. The Rinnegan's abilities were nothing in comparison to the godlike power that surged through Naruto's body. With a final, brutal strike, Naruto impaled Pain through the chest, his demonic energy ripping through the leader's body. The other members of the Akatsuki watched in horror as their leader was felled before them. Naruto stood over Pain's lifeless body, his breathing steady as he surveyed the destruction around him. His enemies had been obliterated, their ambitions crushed under the weight of his rule. He turned to his harem, his loyal followers, who watched with a mixture of awe and fear. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice resonating with the promise of more destruction to come. The world will bend to my will. No one can oppose me. The shinobi world had witnessed the full extent of Naruto's power. And now, there was no one left to challenge him. He was the Demon King, and his rule would last for eternity. Naruto stood on the highest peak of the Hokage Tower, the wind tooling his silvery hair as he gazed out over the village that had once rejected him. Now, it lay under his control, and so did the rest of the shinobi world. The power of Kokushibo, the demon moon, had fused with his own being, propelling him into a realm beyond human comprehension. He was no longer just a shinobi. He was a god, a being whose power eclipsed even the highest legends. His demonic form, once a chaotic manifestation of rage and ambition, had settled into something more. His Kokushibo legacy pulsed through his veins, merging seamlessly with his chakra, his strength now immeasurable. With every breath he took, his influence expanded. The forces of nature themselves seemed to bow to his will. He had bent the world to his vision, remaking it in his image, and there were no rivals left to challenge him. The Akatsuki, the last remnants of organized opposition, had been wiped out, their ambitions crushed under the heel of his might. His harem stood by his side, unwavering in their devotion. Hinata, his first and most loyal, had become his right hand, no longer the shy, timid girl who had once admired him from a distance, but a fierce, confident woman who had fully embraced the dark power that bound her to him. Sakura, Ino, Temari, Tenten, they all stood beside him now, their once weak wills twisted into something stronger, something unbreakable. They had pledged themselves to him, not out of fear, but because they had come to see him as the savior of their world, the one who could grant them the power and protection they had always craved. Naruto's rule over Konoha was unchallenged, and the village flourished under his command. His influence extended far beyond the walls of his home. The entire shinobi world had fallen into his hands, each village bowing before him, forced to accept the new order or face obliteration. The 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist had pledged their loyalty to him, and the remnants of Orochimaru's forces, once scattered, now served him as his loyal soldiers. Yet even in his godlike state, Naruto remained vigilant. The power he had gained was immense, but the world he had conquered was a fragile thing. Beneath the surface, whispers of new threats began to emerge. Rivals who sought to challenge him were being born, powerful figures who had learned from the failures of those before them. The cycle of power and violence was eternal, and even the Demon King knew that his reign would eventually be tested. As Naruto gazed out over the village, his senses reached beyond the land of Konoha, feeling the shifting currents of power in distant lands. A new era had begun, one where he would be both a ruler and a god. But nothing lasts forever, not even in a world ruled by the strongest. Master, Hinata's voice broke his thoughts. He turned to her, his gaze softening for a moment, though the shadows of his power still clung to him. She had grown so much, her strength had flourished under his tutelage, her once tender heart now tempered by the darkness he had shown her. Yes? Naruto asked, his voice still carrying the weight of his authority. The world is at peace, she said, her eyes filled with both admiration and understanding. But I sense that there are those who will rise, who will try to challenge you. Naruto's lips curled into a cold smile. Let them come. They will only be crushed like the rest. Hinata nodded, her loyalty unwavering. She had accepted her place by his side, not just as a lover, but as an extension of his will. Together, they had forged a bond that no force in the world could break. As Naruto turned back to the horizon, his thoughts flickered briefly to the future. The world might fear him, but fear was fleeting. He needed more than that. He needed something permanent, something eternal. The power he had obtained through Kokushibo's bloodline, the power of the moon, was not just a gift, it was a curse, a dark legacy that weighed heavily on him. But it was a legacy he had embraced, for it was through this power that he had found his place in the world. His rule was as much a part of him as his very soul. His harem, his empire, they were his to command, but the true test of his power would come with time. Even gods were not immune to the passage of time, and as his reign stretched on, new enemies would rise, old alliances would fracture, and the world would continue to evolve. But for now, Naruto was at peace. His name had become legend. His strength was unmatched. And in the end, what more could one ask for? He looked down at the village, watching as the people moved below, blissfully unaware of the chains that bound them to him. His grip on the world was absolute, and he would never let go. The moon would never set on his reign. Master, Hinata spoke again, her voice quieter this time. He turned to her, sensing the change in her tone. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on his with a mix of love and reverence. There are whispers, she said softly, almost uncertain. Whispers of those who would rise against you. Powerful forces from beyond the shinobi world, they may come for you. Naruto's gaze hardened, and for the briefest moment, his smile faltered. Let them come, then. Let them try. I will crush them as I have crushed all before. Hinata reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. I believe in you, she said. And I will stand by your side, no matter what happens. Naruto turned his gaze to her, his heart momentarily touched by her words. He had created this empire, this world, for power, for control. But in this moment, he realized something deeper, it was for them, too. For the ones who had chosen him, the ones who had stood by him. The moon above them shone brightly, a symbol of his reign. He had surpassed mortal limits, and yet, in the shadows, something new stirred a presence, an ominous feeling that hinted at challenges yet to come. Do not worry, Naruto finally spoke, his voice a calm declaration. The world belongs to me. And those who think otherwise will learn what it means to stand before a god. And so, as the moon bathed the world in its light, Naruto stood victorious, his reign unchallenged. But in the distance, there were hints of future threats, whispers of enemies yet to rise, of power yet to be discovered. The eternal struggle for dominance would continue, but for now, Naruto was the undisputed king. The Demon King, the Moon King, his power was boundless, and his rule would never falter. His eyes, now glowing with the light of the moon, fixed on the horizon. The world was his, and no one would ever take it from him.